Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and I got some fantastic news today, as it looks like Mythic Plus dungeon content for Season 2 has just been saved, with Blizzard putting out a massive blue post talking about some of the changes they mean to implement for the patch 11.1, where they address all of the pitfalls for Season 1 of the War Within expansion, like a pretty toxic pug experience, but also a difficulty to get into entry-level dungeons, the rewards being not as good, and they're looking to revamp that entire system completely. But buffing the rewards that players can get from dungeons, whether you're an entry-level player or someone looking to push some of the higher-end content, with more players unlocking champion track and hero track items, but even more crests to upgrade those pieces. They're also looking to improve the pugging experience of players just diving into some dungeons for the very first time by removing one of the most toxic affixes and shifting it out towards a push affix instead. Besides this, they're also adding even more rewards into the Mythic Plus ecosystem to give players even more reason to do some of the more difficult dungeons, which should hopefully upgrade the population of players that are looking for pushing Mythic Plus content. And I want to go over all of these different dungeon improvements coming to the Season 2 of the War Within expansion in today's video. As always, if you guys want to see more regular updates for the patch 11.1 right now in the PTR, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right into all of these newest updates. So there was a big new blue post that announced a bunch of new adjustments coming out for Season 2, which is looking to not only make the content and the environment of Mythic Plus more pug friendly, allowing more players to dive into Mythic Plus if you haven't been playing so far, but also allowing to let players progress into that push level. Because the whole point of Mythic Plus is to give players a sense of progression, not only when it comes to gear and the rewards, but also to encourage more and more players to want to push higher end Mythic Plus dungeons. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but the more players can get into that push environment, the more players will be able to play with one another at that higher and higher difficulty content of dungeons, which is overall should hopefully make Mythic Plus content and the environment and the population a lot healthy if these changes are successful. One of the biggest things they tried to solve for Season 1 is pugs in Mythic Plus, which have been a little bit harder to get into with the War Within expansion, mostly because delves are actually a competitive form of alternative ways of gearing out your character, allowing you to collect a bunch of gear with champion track level and even hero track from the Great Vault. But once players got all the champ track gear from delves, which they can easily jump into, there is no one to stop them or prevent them from joining groups. You can run them as solo as long as you have a leveled up Bram, collect all the gear, gear up your character, no holding, no weight, no LFG required. And then from there, as you're trying to progress your gear into hero track items, you're trying to jump directly into +7s because any keys lower than that are just not that valuable. However, a lot of players are then jumping into +7s that are more challenging dungeons without not having nearly as much dungeon experience to do well within that type of content. As +7s are pretty punishing, mostly because of the affix of Challenger's Peril. It is not the fan favorite affix whatsoever. And this Challenger's Peril is way too punishing for players that are diving into +7 that are not super experienced within keys, and this has a knock-on effect, because deaths are now going to be a lot more punishing, wipes are also not great either, and time management with this dungeon has become a lot more strict. This leads to more toxic pug experience where players are then more selective on who they invite for a key, usually preferring meta classes to make their dungeon experiences easier, which has been always a thing, but now players are a lot pickier than ever before because they just want to time their key, and they would rather take somebody with a decent score, huge item level, best in slot classes, all those things, anything to get them to get the dungeon over with, because most players are more than likely to just wait until they have that perfect composition than to take a player that may play like a Feral Druid or a Shadow Priest, like a non-meta class that may have the experience, may even have great score, but they'd rather wait to get themselves an Enhancement Shaman or a Disc Priest or a Prop Paladin, any one of those meta classes. This also leads on to an issue where, with delves being the way the players gear for champion track gear, keystones of +6 to +2 difficulty, anywhere between that high end and low end, are also seeing lower participation rates. So they're looking for a pretty big revamp heading into 11.1. Part of that revamp is to buff up the rewards from baseline Mythic Zero dungeons and give players a reason to dive into base Mythic Zeros, like Rookery, for example, is going to be one of the newer dungeons, Dark Flame Cleft, Cinderbrew Meadery, Priory. A lot of players are walking into the season 2 without not having a lot of experience of what the bosses and the enemies and the mobs in these dungeons really do. Plus 4 additional dungeons that are added as part of the season 2 update with Operation Floodgate, Mechagon, Theater of Pain, which is actually surprisingly kind of a they revamped it a little bit, so it's not nearly as bad as it was from back in the day, as well as the dungeon of Motherlode. And all those baseline dungeons, the Mythic Zero version of the gear that they drop is Veteran Track, which players outgear very quickly. But they're changing it so the basic Mythic Zeros will now sort of drop Champion Track gear instead. So if you're someone who is just getting into dungeons, just getting your way into Season 2 content, diving into M0 is going to be so much more lucrative. This means that more players are going to be able to experience these dungeons, experience these boss fights, and have a much better understanding of what these dungeons are going to do as you gear out your character. Once you've done all your delves for the week or for the day, you might just jump into Mythic Zeros and get a lot more natural experience within these dungeons while unlocking fantastic rewards. Also, any dungeons of +2 to +10 difficulty are also going to see a decrease in difficulty from a 10% increase per dungeon level down to 7%. So the mobs are not going to scale nearly as quickly, which means that most dungeons anywhere from +2 to +10 are going to be a little bit easier for most players to get into all across the board. However, scaling higher than a +10, like +11, 12 and whatnot, is still going to remain at a +10 difficulty increase. So those push dungeons that no longer offer you any additional gear rewards are going to start to challenge you a little bit more. But all those dungeons that you would use to gear out a character, they're not going to be as challenging as they were during Season 1. Also, they're switching up the way affixes work a little bit. The Fortified and Tyrannical are going to change up places. So normally once you hit a +4, either one of those two affixes get enabled, but they're switching it so they don't get enabled until a +7. So you don't really see a decent spike of difficulty in dungeon, either buffing the bosses or the trash enemies in the dungeon until a +7. This means that Challenger's Peril no longer shows up as a +7 difficulty. You're only making the enemies within the dungeons a little bit tougher. And then when you hit a +10, if let's say you already had Fortified, then you'll get Tyrannical. If you already had Tyrannical, then you'll get a Fortified. So at +7, you get one of those affixes, and at +10, you get both of those affixes, which is pretty standard when it comes to the difficulty curve of the next season, but all those dungeons are not going to scale nearly as much, so it still should be a little bit easier. However, Challenger's Peril is not going away. It's actually going to be replacing Xal'atath's Guile. So instead of increasing enemies' damage by 10% additional health and damage, they're instead going to enable Challenger's Peril instead of Xal'atath's Guile. So I imagine you still are going to be having that affix of Xal'atath's that removes Bargain, so you no longer have a Kiss and a Curse mechanic, but when you're pushing +12s and higher dungeons, this way it's going to be a little bit more challenging. Players that have experience, there's a good chance you already know what every single one of these dungeons does if you're running at a +12. Now those players are going to be reliant on trying to perfect those dungeons and perfect those mechanics, no longer having them have that additional scaling from Xal'atath's, but now they're going to be a little bit limited on the timer, which is a bit of a change up that allows players that are pushing higher end content to then experience that punishing death mechanic, but also the reward of getting better score. But any of the dungeons where players are actually getting gear from will no longer have to deal with this punishment mechanic, so players that are looking for a challenge get a challenging affix, and players that are looking to gear themselves will have a much breezier experience. There's also a bunch of different gear changes as well, as they're adjusting what type of gear you can get from different dungeons. Not only can you get Champion Track from M0, but they also are adjusting it so at the end of a dungeon run from a +6, +6s are going to start dropping you Hero Track gear, which means that more players are going to be able to outfit themselves with end of dungeon Hero Track items to push for some of the higher end dungeons to have an easier time scaling up to that higher dungeon difficulty, which is massive. And they're also adjusting it since normally +7 would drop your hero track, now the +6s drop your hero track. They're now changing it so +7s now drop the Gilded Crest from the Season 2 in order to be able to upgrade those hero track pieces to the highest possible levels, which is massive. It still is rewarding for you to do some of the higher end dungeons like +10s, 11s, and 12s. The higher you go, the more Gilded Crests you're going to get. That system is still going to stay in play. However, now you can spam +6s in order to get hero track items, in order to have an easier time getting into 7s. And then you spam in 7s to get Gilded Crest to upgrade those hero track pieces, and those upgraded hero track pieces can help get into 8s, 9s, 10s, and 11s and further on to allow players to be able to push their gameplay up a little and allow an easier time for players to get into some of the higher end push content. But overall, more gear, more crests, more upgrades, and overall a much better environment for Mythic Plus dungeons is what they're trying to achieve with 11.1. Besides this, Season 2 also is going to go through a bunch of new rewards. Normally we get a KSM reward that is basically a recolor from season to season. For the Season 1 of War Within, we got ourselves the Diamond Mech Suit, and many of us assumed that we were going to get a recolor of this mech suit for Season 2, but instead they're giving us a whole another mount for Season 2, the Crimson Shredder Tank, a Goblin-themed mount for a Goblin-themed season, which is amazing. That's still going to be a reward for KSM for achieving 2,000 points within Mythic Plus season, and there's also going to be a new Keystone Legend reward at 3,000 Mythic Plus score, which is going to be kind of difficult to get into, but at least they're allowing you to get more rewards and are rewarding players for pushing higher end content with an enterprising Shredder Tank, a recolor of the similar mount, but one that's going to be coveted by players either way. Also, in Season 2, they changed the keystones so they're no longer deplete. There's nothing worse than when you dive into some Mythic Plus dungeons and then something goes wrong. Maybe somebody pulls an extra mob by accident, causing a group a wipe. And with the challenge's peril affix, it is pretty easy for you to lose out on a timer for that key, even if most of the things and most of the pulls in the dungeon go correctly. So they're trying to add a new achievement for keystones to no longer deplete within Season 2. Like, once a player has completed all of their dungeons at a plus 12 difficulty, they will no longer see their Mythic Plus keystones deplete below a plus 12, as in plus 12s becomes their new floor. And this should work as an account-wide achievement, as in once your main unlocks it, then your alts might be able to do it. Initially, they introduced this as an achievement. I'm not sure if they'll still keep this as an account-wide achievement and account-wide progression heading forward, because PTR has changed by quite a bit, but at the very least for the player themselves, it'll allow them to get that plus 12 towards their keystone level as a new floor. So even if you're running a plus 12 and something goes wrong and you don't time the key, you still get to keep the key at a plus 12 so you can try again. It is now a new safety net that allows you to push up to the higher score. But this key floor, however, is going to be able to push up. It is going to be one of those things that's a safety net that allows players to keep pushing higher and dungeons. What they said on the blue post is this floor will raise as players push up all of their dungeons. So once you get all of your Mythic Plus keystones to a plus 12, your new floor is now a 12. But if you push up all of those dungeons to now a plus 13 and time them, now your floor becomes a plus 13. And on and on and on as you get them all at 14, 15, 16. This allows players to continue to push upwards and continue to raise their floor again and again. It allows players to reach certain key push milestones and lock those in and continue to work on the next keystone difficulty afterwards. Once you can reliably time all 13s or all 14s, now you can start pushing up to 15s, and once you get them all done, then you can go to 16s and continue to push. And I think this keystone milestone thing they got going on with this new floor should hopefully get a lot of more players to want to push more Mythic Plus dungeons, because they no longer can brick their key, they can no longer ruin that key, because now they hit a certain floor that allows them a much easier time to not have to re-push that key all the way to exactly where you want it, but now you can use that floor to push up to that next level and then try to see if you can secure that new milestone, which is amazing. All in all, patch 11.1 is going to be a fairly sizable shakeup for Mythic Plus dungeon system to allow more players to easily jump into this entire ecosystem of endgame content, especially since Mythic Pluses are competing with delves for players' attention and players' time, and they're really trying to make sure that Mythic Pluses are bolstered without having to nerf or adjust delves. And if players want to do delves, they can, but they want to make sure that dungeons still feel lucrative. The players do want to do that endgame group content in order to gear out the characters, that there's plenty incentives for players to want to jump into it, even if they haven't done it before, even if this is their first time really getting into Mythic Plus dungeons. They want to make it as welcoming of an experience as possible, and that's what they're trying to accomplish with 11.1. This also allows less necessity for meta classes. With all these different changes when it comes to the gearing process, you'll have ideally less necessity for meta classes to complete your dungeons, to get your KSMs, or maybe even hopefully your Keystone Legend achievements. They also want to make sure to give players a new pathway to enter the Keystone pushing environment. Many players play dungeons just to gear out their characters, but not that many players are encouraged to want to push up to the higher end content. But with additional seasonal rewards that reward players for pushing that content, new milestones that allow players to secure a keystone floor, and better gearing progression system that allows them to excel for that type of environment, to be better prepared for that type of environment, should hopefully get more players into the higher end pushing dungeons, so that your plus 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s, and higher end dungeons are a lot more populated, and that whole population is hopefully more healthier heading forward into season 2, which is also a massive undertaking. Not only are they trying to secure Mythic Plus dungeons for entry level players, mid-tier players, but also some of the higher end players, to try to allow everybody to excel, improve, and potentially funnel more players into that push meta, which is exciting to see. But with that being said, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope you guys did enjoy this little update. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community where we discuss all of the newest patch 11.1 PTR updates pretty regularly. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.